Well, hello good people, look what just arrived.
Fred is already on this guy.
The InWin A1. You see, I love me a good quality ITX enclosure. Hopefully this is one of them. Let's unbox. Wow, so that thing is looking pretty sweet. Let me show you through B-roll. Alright, so now that's out of the way, I know you guys like, and of course I do too, my take of B-roll, but in this video I want to talk about 5 reasons of why I love ITX and why that little A1 is replacing my current large tower. So let me tell you why I love ITX so much right after this. The new Mastercase MK750 keyboard comes with a comfortable magnetic wrist rest, beautiful RGB light bar on the perimeter and per key lighting control with a variety of Cherry MX switches and a bottom Type-C connection. Cooler Master doing it right. Check it out below. So, the first obvious advantage with ITX is size. Don't get me wrong, I love my PC 011 Dynamic. It's a beautiful, glass enclosure. I can fit a lot of things in there, but it requires its own little pedestal, so it's kind of on the same level as my desk. But look at this guy. He's tiny and you can definitely put it on the desk itself and not occupy another piece of furniture. So relocating this case is really not an issue if you decide to move it around a little bit in your space. Plus, you can potentially put it in some form of a duffel bag if you're going to a LAN event or just want to carry this thing wherever you go. And for size comparison, here's the H500i from NZXT, the latest mid-tower. This thing is pretty compact, but look at how much smaller the A1 is. Here's the GPU right next to it for a little size reference. This has a glass top, which is awesome, so you can accessorize, obviously, the perfect space for Fred. And by the way, the glass top has a Qi charger built in, which is awesome, so you can charge your smartphone, or, as in my case, I can charge my mouse on top of the case, a really unique feature for the A1. Reason number 2, potentially the less obvious one, aside from the much smaller form factor, would be the unique designs that we have with ITX cases. For example, take the Shift X from Fantex, a really unique towering ITX case. Make sure to check out our review over here. The N-Case M1 is a really popular format. The new Streacom DA2 that we checked out at Computex, that's a really unique one here. And the A1 sort of fits within that same formula of being compact, space efficient, and doesn't have any hardware compromises in terms of what you can fit, in terms of GPU, some storage, and cooling. There is a lot of happening with the A1 in terms of design, so like the curvature of the front panel, different materials, that transparent section at the bottom is not something that we have seen, but the only thing that kind of stands out to me is the InWin text at the front. It's not my thing, but at least it's not too intrusive. Whereas with ATX case designs, they all feel too similar to each other, so there is less differentiation in the ATX space versus what you can get with ITX. Which brings me to my third point, and that is size does not matter. For powerful hardware, you can still have an incredibly powerful and capable machine without it occupying much space. And to prove that point, I'm going to relocate my main system from this giant full tower into the tiny A1 without changing any of my main hardware components. So that is an 8600K inside this ITX motherboard. I've had no issues overclocking it to 5 GHz, which is awesome. The Titan XP is gonna go in here. The M.2 drive, which is my OS drive, is gonna go underneath this heatsink, and I have 3 additional SSDs, which is perfect because this motherboard has 4 SATA connections. The only thing that's different will be memory capacity, which is cut in half because I only have 2 RAM slots instead of 4, but still 32 gigs of RAM is totally fine. In some aspects, this motherboard is far superior versus my Z370 ATX Prime because this one has a Type-C front I/O connection and a 5-volt addressable RGB header, which is perfect for this case. It also has built-in Wi-Fi. Excellent. So now let the system swap assembly into the A1 begin. So there she is, fully assembled, everything's working fine, which brings me to my fourth point. The satisfaction of building something like this, because you know it's more challenging, everything is more crammed, there's less space to work with. You have to approach it from like a strategic point of view, and when you're routing the 24-pin cable, the 8-pin cable. For example, here I had to insert the CPU tower after the motherboard, and all the cables were pre-routed because otherwise it would just not fit. And so you kind of have to go around a certain way to work around the limitations of such a tiny space. But in the end, if you're doing it the right way, it is super rewarding. Now, the underglow of this skirt is actually pretty cool as long as you have a 12-volt RGB header on your motherboard. Otherwise, it's just simply blue if you power it via SATA. Now, the A1 comes with a built-in 600-watt bronze certified power supply, so it's not that efficient, but 600 watts should be enough for my system. The thing is, it only has 3 SATA connections, so for my 3 SSDs, that's fine, but the lighting control here also requires SATA power, so just keep that in mind. And check this out. There is this plastic cover that goes over the cable exit, hiding that stuff. Really nice, but it is physically attached to the power supply via a screw. So if you were to replace the power supply, maybe pop in your SFX or another ATX power supply in here, you will not be able to install the bracket back. So it'd be nice if this thing was installed to the frame and not on the power supply itself. Now, this whole situation with the power supply cover is unfortunate because this is a terrible design. InWin, come on, because you have to slide it from the side, but that's where my CPU tower is. You know, it'd be nice if this was just like a little clip-on from the top. You don't have to worry about like passing any cables through it. Really bad because I cannot install this now, and you can see the cables exiting from the power supply. Now, I will say I'm pretty proud of my cable management job. You know, nothing is sticking out the front, so there is no restrictions for airflow, and like I can remove components without cabling being on the way. But I'm also pretty happy at the cable management job at the back. So both SSDs are connected, and you know, no cabling is sticking out, so I can close the panel no problem. But now you may be thinking, hey Dimitri, what's up with the airflow? You went from a 360 all-in-one cooler and potential to install 6 more fans inside the Li & Li case to something like that, where you have one intake fan from the side and just the CPU tower fan doing all the exhaust for you. And that brings me to my 5th point of why I love ITX. If configured correctly for airflow, you're looking at less volume of air that needs to be replaced every second, and therefore you don't need to cram that enclosure with so many fans, because one intake from the side and one exhaust will definitely do the trick for cooling. With my CPU tower that does a pretty decent job at 5 GHz on the CPU, and the GPU is staying pretty nice and cool too. And the only real compromise I have with my ITX motherboard is that I only have 2 fan headers, which means that I cannot connect more fans without splitters, which I don't have, but I would potentially install one intake at the bottom to deliver cool air for the GPU, and one additional exhaust fan at the back so that you can create this nice channel of airflow. The fans are super quiet anyway, so I wouldn't worry about noise. Now, sure, in mid towers you have more radiator space and space for fans and just general emptiness inside the enclosure, so things can feel like, you know, you're not crammed in. But with a proper setup in a tiny space, you're looking at the same temperatures, if not better. Alright, so those are all my reasons of why I love ITX, and potentially encourage you guys to move into that direction, because, you know, there is some challenge that is involved in working with such tight quarters, but it is a rewarding experience as long as you approach it from that mentality. It's not like a giant food tower where you have a lot of space to maneuver. You know, it's a compact space, and you have to approach it accordingly. Now, the one split point when it comes to ITX systems are the visuals. You know, it's not really about how the hardware looks on the inside. Instead, it's all about the exterior visuals. So I'm using the Titan XP, the collector's edition. It looks beautiful, but it's almost semi-wasted on the interior because you can't see it. And so I was gonna use the T-Force Team Group memory, the Nighthawk, because the lighting on here is fantastic. Plus, this is a white module, so it kind of fits in with the white theme of the case and the silver motherboard. Majority of the time with ITX, you'll have to steer away from beautiful hardware into something that is just functional and non-visible. And by the way, you can check out the Team Group memory down in the description below. Now, aside from having fewer fan headers on the motherboard because of ITX, for this case in particular, we only have 2 USB ports on the I/O, which is fine for ITX, but that is one of the advantages of larger mid towers and full towers that normally come with 4. But I would say the main deterrent or the disadvantage when it comes to ITX for most people would be price. Regardless of the difficulty of working in something like this, this Z370 motherboard inside there is more expensive than my Z370 ATX Prime motherboard, which is definitely more future-proof, more expansion stuff. So yeah. But aside from more expensive hardware, you're also looking at more expensive enclosure. So this one sells for $169, and while it has that unique underglow and just the entire format is pretty cool, plus the Qi charger, the power supply built in, it's more expensive than my Li & Li enclosure, and I love this thing. It's also quite unique. Or the HRF100, for example, the new one from NZXT, that thing is 79 or 69 bucks. And sure, it's much larger, but the experience, I would say, is definitely a lot more pleasing to most people. But yeah, that is what you have to deal with when you go towards the ITX route. I don't know, maybe we should call it the mini-itx tax, because all the hardware is generally more expensive. The process of assembly is more difficult. However, you can't ignore the fact that it's much smaller and the end result is rewarding and satisfactory, at least to me. I don't know, what about you? All right, good people, so those are my 5 reasons why I love ITX. Perhaps you should try the same direction as well. I'm pretty happy how this turned out. I'm keeping all the same hardware as I have on mid towers that I've had that are at least 3 times in volume, and the cooling capacity in here with just 2 fans is actually pretty awesome. And so let me know if you're also considering downsizing, because it's not bad at all. Join the wireless club with Corsair's new Dark Core mouse. Play the way you want with 9 programmable buttons aligned in a comfortable shape, a fantastic sensor you can trust, and crazy good wireless performance, plus Qi wireless charging built in. Focus on the game, the Dark Core will do the rest. Alright, so make sure to check out this other relevant content. Links for parts are in the description below if you're interested in anything that we've shown here today. I'm Dmitry, we'll see you in the next video. It'll probably be a full tower if I look into my crystal ball.